6 months. That's the fastest anyone in this state can do it. If you think otherwise, you're wasting everybody's time. The service manager's voice carried across the crowded showroom as rain tapped against the tall glass windows of Billings Performance Motors. A few customers glanced over. One of them laughed. Another shook his head toward the silver McLaren sitting motionless under the bright lights. The car looked less like a vehicle and more like a wounded promise. Ethan Walker said nothing. He simply rested one hand on his 8-year-old daughter's shoulder, while Lily stared at the supercar with wide eyes. "Daddy, is it broken bad?" she whispered. "Pretty bad," Ethan said. The manager folded his arms. "We've got factory specialists waiting on parts from overseas. 6 months minimum." Ethan's eyes lingered on the car for one quiet second longer than necessary. Then he turned away as if the conversation were over. Outside, cold Montana rain drifted across the parking lot. Lily hurried beside him beneath the gray afternoon sky. "You could fix it, couldn't you?" she asked. Ethan unlocked his aging Ford F-150 but didn't answer right away. The silence seemed to weigh more than the rain. "Some things aren't worth touching," he finally said. Lily frowned. "Because it's expensive?" Ethan looked at the truck door instead of his daughter. "Because sometimes fixing something costs more than people can see." The answer didn't make sense to an 8-year-old. It barely seemed to make sense to him. Back at Walker Automotive, the familiar scent of motor oil and old pine drifted through the garage. The place sat on the edge of town beside a feed store and a diner whose neon sign flickered every evening at sunset. Ethan preferred it that way. Small jobs. Honest work. Quiet days. Lily sat on a rolling stool coloring in a sketchbook while Ethan replaced a water pump on a rancher's Silverado. Then the bell above the office door chimed. A woman stepped inside carrying a soaked leather portfolio under one arm. She paused when she saw the modest garage. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked. "I'm looking for Ethan Walker." Her voice was calm, professional. "That's me." For a moment she simply studied him. Not his tools. Not the garage. Him. "I'm Claire Bennett." She extended a hand. "Someone told me you once rebuilt a prototype engine that 3 engineering teams gave up on." Ethan didn't take the hand immediately. Something flickered across his face before disappearing. "Someone talks too much." Claire lowered her hand. "Then the stories are true." Ethan returned to his work. "Stories get bigger every year." Lily peeked over her sketchbook. "Daddy's really good at fixing stuff." Claire smiled at the little girl. "I can see that." Then her attention shifted to a dusty shelf near the office window. Resting there was an old stainless steel stopwatch attached to a worn leather strap. The moment Ethan noticed where she was looking, his expression changed. Not anger. Not fear. Something quieter. He crossed the garage and turned the stopwatch face down. Claire noticed. So did Lily. Nobody said a word. Rain continued ticking softly against the roof. Finally Claire opened her portfolio and slid a photograph across the counter. It was the same damaged McLaren from the dealership. "The owner wants one last opinion before shipping it out of state," she said. Ethan glanced at the picture. Then he looked away. "Not interested." Claire nodded as though she expected the answer. "That's what everyone said you'd say." She headed toward the door. "But they also said there was a reason." After she left, the garage felt strangely quieter. Lily climbed down from her stool and tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy?" "Yeah? Why do you always look sad when you see that timer?" Ethan stared at the upside-down stopwatch. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the wheat fields. Inside, he never answered the question. The next morning, Ethan found a business card tucked beneath the windshield wiper of his truck. He had not seen Claire leave it. He had not heard anyone pull into the gravel lot after closing. On the back, written in neat blue ink, were 7 words. "I know what happened 8 years ago." Ethan stared at the card while the first light of dawn spread across the empty fields beyond town. The coffee in his hand cooled before he took a second sip. Inside the garage, Lily shuffled in wearing mismatched socks and carrying a stuffed rabbit. "Daddy?" she asked. "Who wrote that?" Ethan slipped the card into his pocket. "Nobody important." Lily looked unconvinced. "Then why do you look worried?" Before he could answer, headlights swept across the garage door. A flatbed trailer rolled into the lot. Ethan stepped outside. The damaged McLaren sat strapped to the trailer like a silver ghost from another life. Claire climbed out of a dark blue Subaru Outback and closed the door. "The owner gave me 1 day," she said. "If nobody here can help, it gets shipped to Seattle." Ethan folded his arms. "I already said no." "You did." Claire walked toward the car. "But you did not ask what was wrong with it." That stopped him. Only for a second. Yet she noticed. Claire opened a folder and handed him a technical report. Ethan glanced at the first page. Then the second. His eyes narrowed. By the third page, he was no longer pretending not to care. Lily watched from the office doorway. "Daddy knows what it is, doesn't he?" Claire looked at Ethan instead of answering. "Most people think it is a parts problem," she said. "You do not." Ethan shut the folder. "No." The wind shifted across the lot. Somewhere down the road, a train horn echoed through the valley. Claire waited. Finally, Ethan spoke. "The part is fine. The failure started somewhere else." A spark of surprise crossed her face. It was the first time he had volunteered an opinion. "That is exactly what I thought," she said. For the first time, they were standing on the same side of a question instead of opposite sides of an argument. An hour later, Ethan found himself beside the McLaren despite every reason he had given for staying away. The garage felt different with the car inside. Smaller somehow. Claire stood nearby reviewing notes, while Lily sat on a stool drawing pictures of race cars. Then Lily pointed toward the office. "Daddy, your timer is making noise." Ethan froze. A faint ticking drifted from the shelf. The old stopwatch should not have been running. He crossed the room quickly and picked it up. The second hand moved in slow circles. Tick. 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 Claire noticed the color leave his face. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan stared at the stopwatch. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. The watch had been broken for years. As silence settled over the garage, Claire looked from the stopwatch to Ethan. The mystery she came searching for suddenly felt much larger than the car sitting between them. Then Ethan made a decision he had not planned to make. He set the stopwatch beside the repair report and said 4 words. "Open the engine compartment." Why had a stopwatch that had been silent for years suddenly started ticking again? The question lingered in the garage even after nobody mentioned it. Ethan tried to focus on the car. Claire tried to focus on her notes. Yet both of them kept glancing toward the small stainless steel watch resting beside the repair report. The steady ticking seemed too loud for something so small. Ethan lifted the rear panel and studied the engine bay. Within seconds his posture changed. Claire noticed it immediately. The guarded mechanic who had spent 2 days avoiding this project was gone. In his place stood someone else. Someone who saw patterns where other people saw problems. "There," Ethan said, pointing toward a section of wiring hidden beneath a carbon fiber panel. "That modification was never supposed to be there." Claire stepped closer. "Nobody caught that. Because they were looking at the symptom." He reached for a flashlight. "Not the cause." Lily watched from her stool, swinging her legs. "Is that good?" Ethan almost smiled. "It means the car is telling the truth." Claire looked at him differently after that. Not because he was right. Because he sounded like a man who had once loved solving impossible things. By noon, word had spread through town. A customer stopping for brake service mentioned the exotic car. Someone at the diner repeated the story. By lunchtime, people were finding excuses to drive past Walker Automotive. Ethan hated attention. He kept the garage doors half closed. It did not help. A rancher delivering feed stopped by and peeked inside. "You really taking that job?" he asked. Ethan did not look up from the engine. Looks that way. Thought you quit doing projects like this. The rancher immediately regretted saying it. A silence settled over the garage. Ethan returned to work. The man left without another word. Claire pretended to review paperwork, but she had seen it. Every time someone mentioned Ethan's past, something tightened behind his eyes. Later that afternoon, while Ethan was tracing electrical data through a laptop, Lily wandered into the office searching for crayons. A dusty cardboard box sat beneath an old workbench. She knelt beside it. "Daddy?" she called. "Can I open this?" Ethan looked up. The color drained from his face the moment he saw the box. "No." The answer came too fast. Lily blinked. "Why?" Ethan crossed the room and picked it up. For a second, Claire noticed faded handwriting on the side. One word stood out. Ben. Ethan carried the box into a storage closet and shut the door behind him. When he returned, nobody spoke. Yet something had changed. Claire now had two mysteries instead of one. The stopwatch. And Ben. Evening settled across Montana in shades of gold and copper. The last sunlight stretched through the garage windows while Ethan studied a stream of diagnostic numbers. Suddenly he stopped. Claire looked up. "What is it?" Ethan stared at the screen. "The report was wrong." "Wrong how?" He pointed to a tiny fluctuation buried inside thousands of lines of data. "This failure started long before the breakdown." Claire frowned. "How long?" Ethan looked at the numbers again. Then at the McLaren. Then at the ticking stopwatch. "About 8 years ago." How could a mechanical failure begin 8 years before a breakdown nobody noticed until now? Claire replayed Ethan's words the next morning while pale sunlight spread across the gravel lot outside the garage. The question had followed her home. It followed her back. Inside, Ethan was already working. Coffee sat untouched beside him. The stopwatch continued its steady ticking on the workbench. "You were not talking about the car, were you?" Claire asked. Ethan tightened a connector and kept his eyes on the engine. "Sometimes machines tell the same story people do." It was not an answer. Yet it was more than he had given before. Lily sat at a folding table finishing homework. She looked between them. "You both talk like puzzles." Claire laughed. Ethan almost did. The moment passed quickly, but it left something warmer behind than either expected. By late morning, the engine was partially disassembled. Ethan moved with quiet precision, finding problems hidden beneath other problems. Claire watched him uncover one overlooked defect after another. "How did everyone miss these?" she asked. Ethan wiped his hands with a shop towel. "Because they trusted the report more than what was in front of them." Claire fell silent. The words landed harder than he realized. For years she had been telling people the same thing about a safety concern at her former company. Nobody listened. For the first time, she saw a reflection of her own story in his. Then another change arrived. A black SUV pulled into the lot. A man in an expensive jacket stepped out and introduced himself as the vehicle owner. He expected confidence. Instead, he found a small-town garage, a single father, and an 8-year-old girl drawing horses with crayons. His skepticism showed immediately. "You are the mechanic?" he asked. Ethan nodded. The man glanced around the building. "This place does not exactly inspire confidence." Claire stiffened. Ethan did not react. "Then you should probably leave," he said. The owner blinked. "Excuse me? Trust matters more than horsepower." Ethan returned to work. "If you do not trust me, do not leave the car." The silence that followed felt longer than it was. Finally, the owner looked at the half-disassembled engine and sighed. "Finish what you started." After he left, Claire stared at Ethan. "Most people would have begged for that job." Ethan shrugged. "Most people need the job more than they need their self-respect." Something shifted in Claire then. Respect replaced curiosity. That afternoon, while searching for a service manual in the office, she noticed a framed photograph tucked behind an old filing cabinet. two young men stood beside a race car. Both were smiling. One was Ethan. The other wore the same grin. Ben. Before she could study it further, Ethan stepped into the doorway. Neither spoke. He gently took the photograph and turned it face down. Was he your brother? Claire asked. Ethan looked toward the garage where Lily was humming to herself. The ticking stopwatch filled the silence between them. Yes, he said. Then, after a pause that seemed to carry 8 years of weight, he added, and everything changed after the last car we built together. What happened after the last car Ethan and Ben built together? Claire carried that question through the rest of the day, but Ethan offered nothing more. The photograph disappeared back into a drawer. The conversation closed as quickly as it had opened. Yet something else had changed. For the first time since she arrived, Ethan no longer treated her like an outsider passing through town. Near sunset, he handed her a flashlight and pointed toward a section of exposed wiring. Hold this here. It was a small request. Somehow it felt bigger. Claire crouched beside him while warm orange lights spilled through the garage windows. Lily sat nearby drawing pictures on butcher paper from the diner next door. Daddy, your car looks less broken now, she said. Ethan glanced toward the engine. That is because we finally found where the problem started. Lily tilted her head. Then why do you still look worried? Ethan did not answer. Claire noticed his hand drift toward the ticking stopwatch. The movement lasted only a second, but it was enough. The car was getting better. Whatever lived inside Ethan was not. The next morning arrived with clear skies and cool mountain air. Walker Automotive opened at 7. By 8, 2 pickup trucks had stopped outside just to see the progress. By 9, somebody had posted photographs online. The garage suddenly felt exposed. Ethan hated it. Claire found him pulling down one of the bay doors. People are interested, she said. People get interested right before they start making assumptions. About the car? Ethan shook his head. About everything. Before Claire could respond, Lily came running from the office holding a folded newspaper clipping. Daddy, I found this inside one of my coloring books. Ethan turned. The moment he saw the clipping, all color left his face. Lily held it out innocently. A faded photograph showed a younger Ethan standing beside a race car. Ben stood next to him. Both looked proud. Above the image was a headline. Local brothers win National Engineering Award. Claire watched Ethan carefully. Why was that hidden in a coloring book? Lily asked. Ethan took the clipping. His voice came out softer than expected. Because some things belong in the past. Lily frowned. But it looks happy. That simple observation landed harder than any accusation could have. Ethan folded the clipping and slipped it into his pocket. He returned to work without another word. By afternoon, Claire made a discovery of her own. While reviewing old technical records connected to the vehicle, she found a familiar name buried inside archived engineering documentation. Benjamin Walker. Her pulse quickened. Ben had worked on systems remarkably similar to the one now causing trouble. The dates matched. 8 years. The same number that kept appearing around Ethan's silence. Claire stared at the screen. Suddenly the mystery felt less like coincidence, and more like a thread connecting everything. She looked toward the garage floor where Ethan worked alone beneath the lifted chassis. For the first time, she wondered if the damaged car was not reminding him of a mistake. Perhaps it was reminding him of a person. As evening settled over the valley, Lily climbed onto a stool beside her father. She watched him tighten a final component before asking a question so simple it almost sounded harmless. Daddy, are you scared of this car? The wrench stopped moving. The ticking stopwatch filled the silence. Ethan stared at the unfinished machine for several seconds. Then he finally spoke. No. Lily waited. Then what are you scared of? Ethan looked away from the vehicle and toward the darkening horizon beyond the garage door. This time, he could not answer at all. What was Ethan afraid of if it was not the car? The question lingered through the night and followed Claire back to the garage the next morning. She arrived before sunrise expecting to find the building dark. Instead, a light glowed through the office window. Ethan was already there. He sat alone at the small desk, staring at something in his hands. Claire slowed her steps. For a moment she thought it was the stopwatch. It was not. It was a folded letter. The instant he noticed her reflection in the glass, he slipped it into a drawer and stood. "You are here early," he said. Claire glanced at the drawer but chose not to ask. Not yet. Outside, the sky brightened over the wheat fields. Inside, the distance between them felt slightly smaller than it had a week ago. The repair work accelerated throughout the morning. Components that had baffled specialists were coming together piece by piece. Yet Ethan seemed distracted. More than once he reached for a tool and stopped halfway. More than once he stared at the ticking stopwatch without realizing it. Around noon, Claire stepped outside to take a call. The voice on the other end belonged to a former colleague from California. She asked a question that changed everything. "Did you say Ethan Walker?" Claire frowned. "You know him?" A pause followed. "Years ago, everyone in performance engineering knew him. And everyone knew what happened to his brother." Claire felt her chest tighten. "What happened?" The answer arrived quietly. "Ben survived." Claire stopped walking. Wind moved through the cottonwood trees near the road. "Survived?" "Of course he survived. He moved to Colorado after rehab." Claire looked back toward the garage. Ethan was visible through the open bay door, working beneath the raised vehicle. The words refused to fit with the story she had imagined. If Ben survived, why had Ethan buried his life for 8 years? That evening, after Lily finished her homework, she wandered into the storage closet searching for a missing marker. A few minutes later she emerged carrying a small wooden box. "Daddy, was this Uncle Ben's?" Ethan froze. Claire looked up from the workbench. The box sat open in Lily's hands. Inside were old photographs, racing passes, and a newspaper clipping. One photo slipped onto the floor. Claire picked it up before Ethan could stop her. The image showed 2 young brothers standing beside a car. Across the bottom, written in black marker, were 5 words. "Trust me. We will be fine." Claire looked at Ethan. "Ben wrote this." Ethan nodded once. The garage fell quiet except for the steady ticking from the stopwatch. Finally Claire spoke. "Your brother is alive." Ethan closed his eyes. Not from surprise. From exhaustion. "Yes." "Then why have you been carrying this like a death sentence?" The question hung between them. Lily looked from one adult to the other. Ethan lowered himself onto a stool. For the first time, he did not try to escape the conversation. "Because when the accident happened," he said, staring at the photograph, "Ben lost a life he planned to live." The words settled heavily into the room. Yet Claire noticed something important. He had finally said accident. Not failure. Not blame. Accident. And for the first time, the story Ethan had been telling himself for 8 years began to crack. If Ben was alive, why had Ethan hidden a letter in his desk and carried 8 years of guilt like a man serving a sentence? The answer did not come that night. It arrived the following afternoon in the form of a phone call. Ethan was tightening the final section of the rebuilt system when his cell phone vibrated across the workbench. He glanced at the screen and froze. Claire noticed the change immediately. So did Lily. The name displayed there was simple. Ben. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Ethan did not move. Then the call stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise of any engine. Lily looked up from her coloring book. "Daddy, was that Uncle Ben?" Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket. "Yeah. Are you going to call him back?" Ethan stared at the unfinished work in front of him. "Maybe later." Lily frowned. "You always say later." The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Claire lowered her eyes, giving him space. Yet she understood something now. Ethan was not avoiding the past because it hurt. He was avoiding a living person who could challenge everything he believed about that past. By late afternoon, the repair was entering its final stage. Components were back in place. Systems were responding exactly as Ethan predicted. The impossible timeline no longer looked impossible. But the closer he came to finishing the project, the more distant he seemed. Claire found him standing alone outside the garage watching the sun settle behind the mountains. "You are afraid of what happens when this is done," she said. Ethan gave a faint laugh. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Say things I am trying not to think about." Claire folded her arms against the cool evening air. "The car gave you something to focus on." "Maybe. And when it is finished?" Ethan looked across the empty fields. "Then I run out of excuses." Neither spoke for a while. The breeze carried the scent of cut hay from a nearby ranch. Somewhere down the highway a freight train rolled through the valley. For the first time, Claire understood that the project had never been the real challenge. Finishing it meant facing whatever came next. The next morning brought another surprise. Lily was helping clean the office when she found the folded letter Ethan had hidden days earlier. She carried it into the garage before realizing what it was. "Daddy, you forgot this." Ethan turned sharply. The letter slipped from her hands and landed on the floor. Claire bent down and picked it up. One line on the front caught her eye before she could stop herself. "To my brother, if you ever decide to read this." Ethan closed his eyes. The garage fell silent except for the ticking stopwatch. Claire handed the letter back without opening it. "Ben wrote that?" Ethan nodded. 6 years ago. "And you never read it?" Another nod. Lily looked confused. "Why not?" Ethan stared at the envelope. Weathered edges. Fold marks. Years of avoidance trapped inside a single piece of paper. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Claire asked the question that changed everything. What if the person who needs forgiveness is not Ben? What if the person who needed forgiveness was Ethan himself? Claire's question lingered long after nobody answered it. The letter remained on the workbench beside the ticking stopwatch. Two objects. Two voices from the same past. One waiting to be read. One refusing to stay silent. The garage felt different that morning. Smaller. As if the walls themselves were waiting. Ethan buried himself in work. The final repairs were nearly complete. Every system check came back clean. Every test pointed toward success. Yet his attention drifted toward the unopened envelope again and again. Around noon, Claire found him standing alone beside the truck he drove every day. "You are finishing everything except the thing that matters," she said. Ethan looked at the folded letter in his hand. "You make it sound simple." "I do not think it is simple." Claire stepped closer. "I think it is the hardest thing you have done in years." Before Ethan could answer, Lily ran out of the office carrying a peanut butter sandwich. "Daddy, are you still sad?" The question arrived with the blunt honesty only an 8-year-old could manage. Ethan crouched beside her. "Sometimes." Lily nodded as if that made perfect sense. "I get sad too." "You do?" "When I miss Mom." Ethan swallowed. Lily held her sandwich with both hands and looked toward the letter. "But I still look at her pictures." Then she walked away without realizing what she had done. Claire watched Ethan stare after his daughter. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not resolution. Movement. By late afternoon, dark clouds rolled across the Montana sky. Rain tapped against the roof while Ethan sat alone in the office. The garage was empty except for the soft ticking of the stopwatch. Finally, he picked up the letter. His fingers hesitated at the fold. Then he opened it. The paper crackled with age. Claire remained outside the office, giving him privacy. She could not see the words. She could only see his face. At first, nothing changed. Then his shoulders lowered. A minute later, he covered his eyes with one hand. When he emerged, the letter remained folded in his grip. Claire stood waiting near the workbench. "What did he say?" Ethan looked at the stopwatch. "He said it was not my fault." Rain continued tapping against the windows. Claire waited. Ethan laughed once. It was a broken sound. 6 years. He shook his head. I carried 6 years of guilt after he already told me to stop. For the first time, anger appeared in his voice. Not anger at Ben. At himself. Then another realization arrived. He called me every birthday. Ethan stared toward the dark parking lot. Every year. Claire understood. The missed calls. The unanswered messages. The unopened letter. None of them came from a man abandoned by his brother. They came from a brother who never stopped reaching back. The rain faded near sunset. A pale stripe of gold appeared beneath the clouds. Ethan walked into the garage and picked up the stopwatch. The old second hand continued its steady movement. Tick. 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 This time he did not turn it face down. Instead, he slipped it into his pocket and reached for his phone. Claire looked up from the repair notes. What are you doing? Ethan stared at Ben's number on the screen. The call button waited beneath his thumb. 8 years of silence stood on one side. Everything else stood on the other. I am done waiting for later, he said. Would Ben answer after 8 years? The question stayed alive through every ring. Ethan stood alone beside the garage as evening settled across the valley. The mountains beyond town faded into blue shadows. His thumb tightened around the phone. Then the line connected. Neither brother spoke at first. Only breathing. The sound of two men standing on opposite sides of the same wound. Finally, a familiar voice broke the silence. Hey, Ethan. No anger. No accusation. Just a brother saying his name. Ethan closed his eyes. I should have called years ago. A faint laugh came through the speaker. Yeah. You probably should have. For the first time in nearly a decade, Ethan smiled. The conversation lasted less than 20 minutes. It changed 8 years. By the time he ended the call, darkness had settled over Montana. The stopwatch rested warm inside his pocket. When he walked back into the garage, Claire looked up from the workbench. She did not ask what was said. She already knew from his face. Something heavy was gone. The next morning arrived bright and cold. The final systems check began before sunrise. Coffee steamed from paper cups. Lily sat wrapped in a blanket on a folding chair, fighting sleep because she refused to miss the ending. Outside, pickup trucks began gathering along the road. News of the impossible repair had traveled farther than Ethan wanted. This time he did not pull the bay doors closed. The engine came alive through a sequence of diagnostics. Numbers scrolled across monitors. Temperatures stabilized. Pressures held steady. Claire watched the data while Ethan listened. Not to the computer. To the machine itself. Years ago, that instinct had made him exceptional. Now it sounded like recognition. Like coming home. Then the final test arrived. Silence settled over the garage. Ethan turned the key. For one suspended moment, nobody breathed. Then the engine answered. Smooth. Clean. Certain. A deep mechanical rhythm filled the space. Not a struggle. Not a miracle. A machine finally speaking the truth after years of carrying the wrong story. Cheers erupted outside. Someone clapped. Someone shouted. Lily jumped from her chair and threw her arms around her father. You did it, Daddy! Ethan hugged her tightly. Yet his eyes drifted toward Claire. Because both of them understood the real victory had happened before the engine ever started. The crowd gradually disappeared as afternoon sunlight stretched across the gravel lot. The owner left with gratitude. The garage grew quiet again. Just a small shop on the edge of town. Just a father, a daughter, and a woman who had arrived carrying wounds of her own. Claire gathered her notes and slid them into her portfolio. So what happens now? She asked. Ethan looked around the garage. For years he had treated it like a place to hide. Suddenly it felt different. Now I stop living like my life already happened. Claire lowered her eyes for a moment. Then she smiled. It was the same expression she wore the first day she challenged him, only softer now. Nearby, Lily spotted the stopwatch resting on the workbench. Daddy, your timer? Ethan picked it up. The second hand continued its steady movement. Tick, tick, tick. Once, the sound reminded him of guilt. Of a day he wished he could undo. Of a brother he thought he had failed. Now it sounded different. Like time moving forward instead of standing still. The late afternoon wind drifted through the open garage door carrying the scent of pine and distant fields. Ethan fastened the worn leather strap around his wrist for the first time in years. He did not hide it. He did not turn it face down. He simply wore it. Lily slipped her hand into one of his. Claire stood beside him and took the other. The three of them watched the sun sink slowly beyond the Montana horizon while the quiet ticking continued beneath the fading light, no longer counting the years he had lost, but the life he had finally chosen to live.